The cameras caught the exact second his smirk died. One moment Adrian Cole sat in the defendant's chair like he owned the building, jaw relaxed, shoulders back, that lazy, practiced half-smile he used in every podcast, every keynote, every photo op. The next, Judge Judy finished one sentence, and it was like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. "You do realize," she said, voice calm as ice, "that what you just described isn't strategy. It's fraud." The air in the studio changed. Adrian's hand, which had been resting casually on his $1,000 briefcase, curled just a little too tightly around the handle. His jaw stiffened. For the first time since he'd strode in, designer suit catching the lights, he looked like a man who didn't trust what was about to happen next. He had no idea that in less than 10 minutes he'd be walked out of that same room, pale and shaking, the internet already sharpening his name into a new shorthand for karma caught on camera. On paper, it was a small claims case. Owen Park v. Adrian Cole, $5,000. That was all. In Adrian's world, 5,000 was a rounding error, a dinner tab, an impulse watch. To Owen, it was 18 months of trying and failing to claw back even a sliver of what he'd lost. They'd started together like all the stories do, two guys in a borrowed co-working space, cheap coffee, cheaper laptops, a simple product, a project management app for small construction crews. Owen wrote the code. Adrian worked the phones, 50-50. That was the promise, equal partners in a company called Crewwork. They signed it, on a plain language founders agreement they printed at a pharmacy and shook on outside a food truck. 2 years later, a regional contractor discovered their app, then a bigger one. Their user numbers climbed, and then came the offer, $250,000 from a mid-tier software firm that wanted to buy them out and fold Crewwork into its own suite. "Let me handle this," Adrian had said. "I've done deals, you focus on the product, I'll focus on the paper." Owen had trusted him. He shouldn't have. 3 weeks after the ink dried, Owen was sitting at his kitchen table staring at a wire transfer for $12,500, not $125,000, $12,500. Adrian? Nowhere to be found, except on Instagram, posing with a new car, dropping just closed another chapter captions, posting screenshots of motivational quotes about playing to win and never apologizing for being the smartest person in the room. When Owen finally cornered him outside a networking event, breath fogging in the parking lot air, asking how the numbers could possibly make sense, Adrian didn't flinch. "You signed the updated docs," he'd said, all shrugs. "You had 10% by the time we closed. That's what the cap table shows. You should have hired a lawyer if you didn't understand it. That's not on me. That's the game." 18 months later, after one dismissed lawsuit, 3 lawyers he couldn't afford, and one investigator who told him honestly, guys like this rarely get hit unless someone catches them on something bigger, Owen sat in Judge Judy's courtroom holding the same folder he'd carried into every office, every meeting, every failed attempt at justice. Adrian, meanwhile, saw opportunity. He had a podcast about founder mindset with 80,000 followers. A blue-check Twitter account where he posted threads on how to win negotiations without linking, a series of slick videos titled "Out-Hinking the Competition," he told his assistant, half-lawing as they sat in his loft the night before filming, that this would be great content. Daytime TV judge, real hustler, clash of old-school law and new-school business. He planned the clips in his head, how he'd talk circles around her, how he'd post the exchange with a caption like, "When the courtroom can't handle high-level strategy." He walked into that studio believing the cameras were on his side. He forgot they were also on hers. From the second Adrian sat down, Judge Judy watched him the way a surgeon studies an X-ray. Not at the suit, though it was clearly expensive. Not at the watch, the briefcase, the polished shoes. She watched the timing. The way he waited a beat too long before answering a simple procedural question, as if savoring the silence. The way his eyes drifted to the main camera before he spoke, instead of to her. The tiny upward jerk at one corner of his mouth when Owen's voice shook describing the deal. She'd seen this posture before. He sat with the same casual, bored contempt as hedge fund managers in Manhattan divorce courts who thought equitable distribution was beneath them. The same amused distance as slumlords trying to explain to crying mothers why the heat didn't work in January. You learned to recognize the type, you learned to let them talk. "Mr. Cole," she said, opening the file, "you're here because Mr. Park claims you cheated him out of his share of a buyout. He says you altered your partnership agreement and concealed those changes before having him sign. He's asking for $5,000, the maximum in this venue. Mr. Park, tell me what happened." Owen's hands shook slightly as he lifted the first document. "The original agreement," he said. 50-50. We both signed. The camera zoomed in on the faded signatures. 2 names, equal. "We built the app together," Owen continued. "No outside money. When the email came from the buyer, he said he'd take point. I trusted him. He slid out a second set of papers. 'This,' he said, 'is what I signed 3 weeks before the sale.' He said it was just cleanup so the buyer's lawyers wouldn't freak out. I didn't see the change. In the ownership table, my stake is marked as 10% here. I didn't know. I just signed where he flagged." Judge Judy's pen scratched across the pad. "Did you get a copy of this after signing?" she asked. "No, Your Honor," Owen said. "He said he'd send it. He didn't. I only saw it after I hired a lawyer and pulled the filings." She turned to Adrian. "Mr. Cole," she said, "is any of that untrue?" He exhaled with a tiny, amused puff, as if this were all very basic. "Your Honor," he said with respect, "I think we need 2 separate feelings from facts. Did I adjust the cap table before the sale?" "Yes." "Did Mr. Park sign the updated documents?" "Also yes." "Did he have the ability to read every line before signing?" Again, yes. "This isn't kindergarten. This is business." He leaned back, crossing an ankle over a knee. "In the startup world," he continued, "roles evolve, responsibility changes. I brought in the buyer. I structured the deal. I took on the liability. It's not unreasonable that my equity reflected that. I didn't hold a gun to his head. He chose not to understand." A few people in the audience shifted, discomfort prickling. "Mr. Cole," Judy said, "did you ever look at Mr. Park in the eye and say you no longer own half this company?" Adrian smiled. "Not a nice one." "I told him," he said, "we were optimizing structure for best outcome." "That's accurate. That's the language. If he heard 50-50 forever in that, that's his projection, not my promise." Judge Judy watched him for a long beat. "Mr. Park," she said, "did you ever receive any money close to what you believed your half would be?" Owen's laugh was dry. 12.5, he said. "He wired me $12,500, told me to enjoy my cut and level up next time." The words hung. "Mr. Cole," Judy asked, "what did you net from this sale?" He shrugged. "Roughly 200 grand, he said, "before tax. But that's not relevant. That's the product of my hustle." Her pen paused. "Not relevant," she repeated. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "He's asking for 5,000. That's sentimental money? A participation trophy?" Someone in the back let out a disgusted breath. Judge Judy's gaze slid back to Adrian. "Mr. Cole," she said, voice taking on that deceptively warm tone regular viewers knew meant danger. "You keep talking about how business works. Tell me your version. Where is the line between strategy and cheating a partner?" He lit up. Finally, a question in his language. "Fraud," he said, "is lying about facts. I didn't lie. I sent him the docs. I filed them. Everything's on record. Strategy is about framing information in a way that advantages you. If others are too lazy or too trusting to read, well, that's not my crime. That's their lesson." He glanced at the camera. "In every deal," he added, "there are people who play the game and people who get played. I choose not to be the second." Owen closed his eyes. Judge Judy's pen resumed its quiet, deadly scratching. What Adrian didn't know was that the folder on her bench didn't just hold Owen's submission. It held his life. "Mr. Cole," she said, flipping to a tab marked in red, "you call yourself a serial founder." He grinned faintly. "Yes," he said, "I've built and exited multiple companies. That's public record. Let's talk about that record." She replied, "My staff pulled some filings. You've been listed as founder or co-founder on 5 entities in the last 6 years. Does that sound right?" He shrugged modestly. "Sounds about right," he said. "That's what happens when you're good at what you do." "And in how many of those," she continued, "did a co-founder leave after a restructuring feeling they got less than they were due?" He frowned now. "That's subjective," he said. "People have feelings about money. That doesn't make them victims." She lifted a sheet. "Into 019, she read, "you dissolved Cole and Hart Analytics. Your then partner, Miss Hart, sued you for diverting client contracts into a new LLC where she had no stake. You settled. That was a disagreement," he said quickly. "We resolved it. It's sealed." "Into 020, she went on, unmoved. You ended a joint venture called Anthem Labs. Your partner alleged in arbitration that you unilaterally amended your operating agreement to change profit splits before signing a major licensing deal. You settled, again. His throat bobbed. In 2021, she said, you were formally cautioned by the state's business registrar after a complaint that you misrepresented partnership terms to angel investors. No charges filed. Still a flag. Those were all different, he said. You're taking old drama and mashing it together. Startups are messy. People get emotional. Judge Judy set the papers down. The messy part I see, she said, isn't the startups. It's your ethics. She steepled her fingers. Mr. Cole, she said, did anyone reach out to you recently from a state agency? Say, within the last 3 months? He hesitated half a beat. No, he lied. I have nothing to hide. She tilted her head. Mr. Park, she said, did you file any complaints beyond this show? Owen looked up, startled to be addressed again. Yes, Your Honor, he said. I filed with the Consumer Fraud Division. They said they'd look into it. Adrian's head snapped toward him. You did what? He blurted. Judge Judy opened a thinner, more official-looking envelope. Interesting, she said. Because the Attorney General's office faxed us this. She waved a letterhead with the state seal visible. It seems, she continued, that your name lit up their system when they saw our case summary. They have active files open on at least 2 of your prior ventures. They were quite eager to receive this hearing's transcript. Adrian's face drained. What does that? He started. It means, she said, that while this is a civil matter, and I cannot and will not charge you with a crime, there are people whose job it is to decide whether your strategy crosses their line. She leaned in. And you have just given them a gift, she added. On video, in high definition, his breathing sped up, the microphone catching the faint hitch in each inhale. Your Honor, he said, voice tight now with respect, I don't think you understand the context in which. With respect, Mr. Cole, she interrupted, I've been practicing law longer than you've been alive. I understand contracts. I understand to the letter what you did. You altered ownership percentages without clear disclosure. You hid the ball. You cashed the check. That isn't brilliance. That's theft wearing a blazer. The line landed. A few people in the gallery let out low, appreciative sounds. Adrian gripped the table so hard his knuckles whitened. I want to stop answering questions, he blurted suddenly. I'm invoking my rights. This isn't a criminal interrogation, she replied. You have no Fifth Amendment shield here. You can refuse to speak further, but you have already said enough. His jaw clenched. For the first time he understood how little of this he controlled. Judge Judy turned slightly in her chair, away from Adrian, back toward Owen. Mr. Park, she said, you asked this court for $5,000. That is the maximum I can give you here, regardless of how much you actually lost. You have provided the original 50-50 agreement. You have shown me the altered cap table. You have testified credibly that you were not informed of the change in plain language. She wrote slowly, deliberately. I find for the plaintiff, she said, in the amount of $5,000 plus reimbursement of your filing fee. Owen closed his eyes. His shoulders sank with something between relief and grief. It's something, he managed. It's the beginning, she said, not the end. She faced Adrian one last time. Mr. Cole, she said, let me be very clear what you accomplished today. Not here, out there. She jerked her chin subtly toward the cameras. You turned what could have been a Hezade squabble over miscommunication into a textbook case of intentional deception. You told me with a straight face that people who don't understand every clause in a contract deserve what they get. You bragged about framing information so a trusting partner would sign away his rights, and you framed it all as philosophy. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Real business, she said, does not require tricking the people who built it with you. Real intelligence finds ways to win that do not require burying your friends. She paused. Men like you, she went on, have been telling stories about the game for as long as there have been deals. You wrap selfishness in buzzwords and call it courage. You weaponize someone else's trust and call it their lesson. Her eyes hard as steel, but here, she said, we call it what it is. Dishonest, exploitative, and very, very stupid to admit on television. Laughter broke out, sharp and satisfying. Even the bailiff's mouth twitched. Adrian's shoulders slumped. Here's my last piece of free advice to you, Mr. Cole, she concluded. Hire a criminal lawyer, not a flashy one, a good one. Because when this tape lands on a prosecutor's desk, they are not going to be impressed by your hustle. They are going to be grateful you saved them a lot of work. She lifted the gavel. For this court, she said, we're done. Judgment for the plaintiff, case concluded. The gavel came down. The echo seemed to follow Adrian all the way to the side door as the bailiff motioned him out. No longer the master of anything. The internet did the rest. The first clip to hit social media was only 12 seconds long. Adrian, all swagger, saying, if someone signs something they don't understand, they deserve what they get. That's not fraud. That's the game. Smash cut to Judge Judy's face as she responded, then you are very bad at games, Mr. Cole, because you just confessed to cheating in front of millions. Caption, when the business guru meets a real one. In 24 hours, it had racked up 10 million views. By the end of the week, the full segment Adrian explaining his strategy. Judy revealing the state investigation, Owen's quiet at something, and Judy's final hire a criminal lawyer was being used everywhere from TikTok stitches to law school discussion boards. A Reddit thread titled, I used to work with this guy AMA popped up within hours of the broadcast. The stories poured in. He did the same thing to my cousin's marketing agency. He ghosted our team after a pivot and we found out later he'd resold our contract list. I interned at one of his companies. He used to say if they sign, they sign. That's consent. We all thought it was messed up. Glad someone finally nailed him. His own feeds turned on him. Under old posts about winning, the comments read, is this before or after you defrauded your co-founders? You gonna teach us how to frame information too? In this video next time you talk about mindset. LinkedIn, his favorite soapbox, became a wall of people distancing themselves, former podcast guests deleting their episodes, panels quietly editing his name out of promotional material. Within 2 weeks, his website redirected to a static page. Consulting paused. In a government office downtown, a junior prosecutor pulled up the episode a second time. Did he really say all this? She asked. Her supervisor nodded, faint disbelief still in his tone. On tape, he said, in front of a judge, couldn't write this in a script and get it greenlit. 2 on the nose. They listed the timestamps. They clipped the admissions. They drafted charges. Months later, standing in a very different courtroom with no cameras and no witty one-liners, Adrian Cole listened as a judge who did not smile read out counts of fraud and falsification of documents. His lawyer whispered plea in his ear. He took it 2 years, suspended with probation, restitution set at amounts that would strip away everything he hadn't already burned on watches and cars. For Owen, the $5,000 from Judge Judy didn't rebuild his life. But it did something more important. He broke the spell. People stopped telling him that's just how business is. Investors who'd seen the clip reached out, impressed not only by his product but by his calm throughout the storm. One of them, a gray-haired woman who'd watched more than her share of corporate ugliness, wrote him a check and one line on the memo for building something honest. His next company moved slower, contracts triplechecked, partnerships written in plain English and read out loud. He hired a lawyer not to bury anyone, but to make sure everyone knew exactly what they were signing. And in small business workshops, whenever someone asked, how do I make sure I don't get screwed by a co-founder? Facilitators would sometimes pull up a clip, not of a dry legal lecture, of an arrogant man sitting in a TV courtroom, explaining how clever he thought he was, and of a judge leaning forward just enough to say, that's not brilliance, that's dishonesty. If you've ever had someone look you in the eye and tell you getting hurt was Your lesson, you already know why this episode hit so hard, because for once in front of millions the lesson went the other way.